Okay, creationism as opposed to evolution. Well, so far the preponderance of the evidence seems to be in favor of creationism as we look at the worldwide flood. Now we look at the post-flood period. What kind of evidence do we have there that we can observe that might indicate which favors which, evolution or creationism? Go to K41. And at the top of the page, we've just started this topic, the post-flood period. When you look at the worldwide flood, you got to know, well, the credibility of the worldwide flood is often questioned because people stop there about the worldwide flood and say, well, what happens afterwards? We don't see any evidence that there was a worldwide flood after the flood. It's presupposed to happen. Well, Marvin Lubenow, in the book he wrote, Bones of Contention, one of the remarkable features of the biblical revelation, when it is interpreted literally, that means in accordance with the standard rules of reading. Some things are figurative, but they have a literal meaning behind them, for example. When it is interpreted literally, is its internal consistency, amen, in recording past events that help to explain the present world. Nowhere is this consistency seen more clearly than in the ability of the worldwide Genesis flood to provide the only adequate explanation for a great geological mystery, the Ice Age. Few realize that the Genesis flood and the Ice Age are intimately connected in terms of cause and effect. It was the severe disruption of the global climate by the Genesis flood that caused the Ice Age to develop immediately afterward. It would be natural to assume that all that is needed to produce an Ice Age is a series of very cold winters. Not so. In many areas of the world, the winters are very cold, yet these areas may have little snow. In contrast to our present climate, the two basic requirements for an Ice Age are much cooler summers and much more snowfall. Probable contributing mechanisms would be warmer winters and warmer oceans. This combination is an unlikely scenario, and the scientific community, limiting itself to present processes, has hard sledding in trying to account for the cause of the Ice Age. Over 60 theories have been proposed to explain the Ice Age, all with serious defects. However, from computer simulations and from what we know of atmospheric science, the Genesis flood was capable of producing the Ice Age. Relatively warmer winters were probably one of the mechanisms that supplied the abundant snowfall necessary for the Ice Age. First, the northern oceans had to remain ice-free to provide the moisture source for that abundant snowfall. Today, the Arctic Ocean is normally frozen, and colder winters would cause major problems of the North Atlantic to freeze as well. Thus, cold winters cut off the moisture sources for an Ice Age. Furthermore, cold air carries very little moisture. Air temperatures in winter had to be warm enough to carry the massive amounts of water to be precipitated as snow. Those who live in northern areas know that very cold weather seldom brings large amounts of snow, whereas some of the heaviest and wettest snowstorms occur in spring. No matter how heavy the snowfalls might have been in winters, if the summers had been warm enough to melt all of the snow, no Ice Age would have occurred. An Ice Age cannot develop in 1 year. There must be an accumulation of snow over many years without significant summer melts. Hence, very cool summers were a basic necessity for the Ice Age. The author says, I was raised in Fargo, North Dakota. Wow. Fargo is in the midst of some of the richest farmland on Earth, the Red River Valley, which is an ancient lake bed formed by glacier melt water. East in Minnesota, there is also much evidence of ancient glaciers. Today, however, in winter, the temperature sometimes drops to 40 degrees below zero. In summer, 100-degree weather is not uncommon. This is not an ice age producing climate. The mystery of the ice age is this. In the very geographic areas where there is incontrovertible evidence of past continental glaciers, the climate today is such that it is impossible for an ice age to be produced there. Further, it stretches the imagination to create a scenario that would have allowed glaciers to produce more there in the past. Let me raise myself up a little bit here. I lost a few feet. Certainly, as far as the Ice Age is concerned, the present is not the key to the past. The logical inference is that since the Ice Age was caused by conditions which do not exist today, only historical records such as the Book of Genesis can give us clues as to what those conditions, those past conditions were. Oxygen isotope and other data give scientific evidence that the deep ocean was warmer for extended periods of the past. While the scientific community cannot explain this fact, warm oceans are exactly what the Genesis model would predict for the early Earth. The waters above the expanse, the atmosphere, created on day 2 of Creation Week, would cause a relatively uniform climate worldwide, including warm oceans and warm polar regions. The oceans would have become even warmer at the time of the flood, when hot water, which was a part of the fountains of the deep, mixed with them. These warm oceans served as a mechanism to supply the abundant moisture necessary for the heavy snowfall of the Ice Age. After the flood, the oceans, while gradually cooling, would remain warm for hundreds of years. However, the land surfaces would cool very quickly for the following reasons. The waters above the atmosphere, having contributed to the rains for the flood, would now be gone, and their insulating effect would be removed. The intense volcanism of the flood would continue for a time after the flood and would put high amounts of particulate matter and aerosols into the atmosphere, which would reflect the sun's rays back into space. 3. Immediately after the flood, the earth would be barren and denuded, and barren land is highly reflective of the sun's rays. This paints a pretty clear picture. The heavy cloud cover produced by the warmer oceans would also be highly reflective of the sun's rays. And 5, the rapidly building snow cover would itself have a cooling effect on the land. The result is that the land surfaces would cool very quickly after the flood. This formula of very cool summers and very heavy snowfall, together with the probable mechanisms of warmer winters, warmer oceans, and cold land surfaces, became the secret for the Ice Age. It explains why the Ice Age started immediately after the flood, why there had not been an Ice Age before that time. Evolutionists claim their claims of pre-Pleistocene ice ages notwithstanding. They have no proof of that. And why there cannot be an Ice Age again. It also explains why the scientific community, which rejects the Genesis flood, they didn't even consider it to refute it. Has never been able to adequately explain the cause of the Ice Age. Evidence there was one, but the cause, they're not going to consider a plausible cause. Now, Michael Ord, an ice age caused by the Genesis flood, he says, during the Ice Age, continental ice sheets covered large sections of North America, Northern Europe, Northwest Asia. The ice occurred even on the high mountains of the tropics. The climate over much of the earth was damp, cold, and rainy. Thick cloud cover caused by the warm oceans together with heavy post-flood volcanisms robbed the earth of much of its sunshine. The condition would have lasted until the slowly cooling oceans gradually approached their present temperature range. It is significant that the book of Job, with its setting after the flood, and probably before Abraham, has more references in it to ice, snow, and violent weather than any other book of the Bible. Interesting. Michael Ord estimates that the time from the end of the flood to the time when the largest volume of ice and snow covered the land, the glacial maximum, was about 500 years, and the time for deglaciation about 200 years. He writes, thus the total length of time for a post-flood ice age from beginning to end is about 700 years. Ord cautions that these are difficult figures to come by because there are too many variables that are poorly known. But it's a very plausible argument. The human responses excuse me, to the harsh climate of the Ice Age would have been to seek out natural shelters such as caves, construct shelters out of whatever material was available, and to wear heavy clothing, probably animal skins, to cover much or all of the body. The lack of access to sunshine, because of the heavy cloud cover, their need for shelter, and the wearing of heavy clothing would have predictably have results of rickets, a lack of vitamin D. Rickets is a deforming bone disease caused by a lack of vitamin D. In humans, vitamin D is produced in the deep layers of the skin through irradiation by the ultraviolet component of sunlight, the very component of sunlight most effectively filtered out by heavy thick clouds. The only significant dietary sources of vitamin D are fatty fish and egg yolk. The archaeological record gives no evidence that Homo erectus, archaic Homo sapiens, or the Neanderthal peoples consumed these foods except sporadically. On the other hand, the Cro-Magnon people, with their very modern morphology, give evidence that fish contributed substantially and routinely to their diet. Further, by Cro-Magnon times, the Ice Age would have been in its final stages, with relatively cool oceans, less cloud cover and volcanism, a drier climate, and more sunshine. Now, the determination of the deluge proper, occupying a period of a little more than a year, as measured between the times of Noah and his family, who, when they entered and left the ark, did not by any means mark the termination of the abnormal hydrologic and geomorphic phenomena. Almost unimaginably profound changes had taken place in the entire domain of terrestrial energetics. I can see that. The precipitation of the antediluvian canopy instituted a new hydraulic cycle, as well as a new cycle of seasons. Major change. A larger proportion of the Earth's surface was now taken up in ocean basins and water surface areas. The pre-diluvian topography was completely changed, with great mountain chains and deep basins now replacing the formerly gentle and more uniform, nearly uniform topography. Removal of the protective canopy around the Earth permitted development of extreme latitudinal variations of temperature, with resulting great air movements and established climatic zones. More on